Have you ever felt that true connection with God does not depend on temples or rituals, as if your faith is something much greater than what any religious institution can offer? Today, you will understand why so many chosen ones are moving away from churches and discovering a purer and freer spirituality. But first, subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because this video may open your eyes to something you've always felt but never knew how to explain. Also, comment right now. My faith guides me. Writing this phrase in the comments is a sign that you are ready to hear your spiritual call. Have you ever felt that even within the church there was something that didn't make sense? As if, instead of strengthening your connection with God, that environment seemed empty, artificial, without the true flame of spirituality. This feeling does not happen by chance. Many chosen ones along their journey notice a misalignment between what the church preaches and what they really feel within themselves. Institutionalized religion should be a path to spiritual awakening, but in many cases it has become just a system full of rules, demands and interests that have little to do with the divine essence. The chosen move away from the church because they feel that their search for God cannot be limited to four walls. The true spiritual calling is not tied to physical temples or traditions created by men, but rather in direct experience with the divine, without intermediaries. This restlessness that many feel when attending a church is, in fact, a sign that they are awakening to a purer and truer faith. They realize that their connection with God cannot be sold, manipulated, or restricted by dogma. The search for truth goes beyond the words of a religious leader and becomes a personal journey of discovery. Departure, however, does not mean loss of faith. On the contrary, many who leave the church report that they have never felt God as present as when they decided to walk their own spiritual path. They come to understand that their mission is not to blindly follow imposed traditions, but to live an authentic faith, free from control and hidden interests. This awakening is painful at first, as it is accompanied by questions, doubts, and often rejection from friends and family. But deep down, it is the first step towards true spiritual freedom. There is a moment in the lives of the chosen ones when the church is no longer enough. They begin to realize that there is something greater beyond the repetitive preaching, beyond the soulful music, and beyond the prosperity speeches. What once seemed sufficient now becomes shallow, without depth. The soul begins to yearn for a more direct connection with God, without human interference, without obligatory rituals, without the need to belong to a system that often seems more interested in keeping believers under control than in truly guiding them to the Creator. This inner calling arises in a subtle but constant way. It may begin with small doubts about certain practices within the church, or with discomfort at the hypocrisy of some leaders. Little by little, the chosen one realizes that he no longer needs an intermediary to connect with God. The search for truth becomes more intense, and he understands that the divine presence is not restricted to a temple, but within his own spirit. He begins to see that faith is something alive, dynamic, that cannot be fitted into rigid and manipulated rules. The church can be a starting point, but it should never be the prison of your spirituality. If you feel like your connection with God goes beyond what religion offers, that doesn't mean you're wrong. On the contrary, it means you are awakening to something greater. The true temple is not made of bricks and mortar, but of your heart. And it is there that God has always been, waiting for you to free yourself from the chains imposed by men to truly find Him. The initial purpose of churches was simple, a place of communion, learning, strengthening faith. But over time, this essence was lost. What was once a refuge for the soul today, for many, has become an environment of demands, status, and power struggles. Spirituality, which should be the center of everything, ended up being overshadowed by materialism and the unbridled search for institutional growth. The temple, which should be a place of connection, often becomes a place of judgment, where appearances are worth more than the essence. Many chosen ones notice this change and cannot ignore it. They feel that something is wrong, that priorities have been reversed. The cult became a spectacle, faith became a bargaining chip, and the message that was supposed to liberate started to be used to imprison. When the search for followers and donations becomes more important than inner transformation, the chosen one feels that that place is no longer their spiritual home. He doesn't just want to hear beautiful words. He wants to feel God, live God, be God in his daily actions. Therefore, many move away, not out of rebellion, but out of necessity. They understand that true faith cannot be measured by the number of times one attends a temple or how much one gives financially. True faith is in everyday life, in compassion, in love, in the sincere search for the Creator. And when a church becomes just an empty structure, the Spirit of the Chosen One asks for freedom to fly beyond the walls that try to imprison their divine connection. It is impossible to ignore the growth of materialism within many churches. What was once a place of spiritual quest has today, in many cases, turned into a commercial empire. Pastors and leaders who should preach humility live in luxury, while believers are pressured to give more and more in the name of a blessing that, supposedly, will only come through financial contributions. Faith, which should be something sacred, became a product, and the chosen ones who have a greater spiritual sensitivity feel this strongly. This misalignment drives away those who seek something true. The chosen one realizes that God is not in an obligatory offering, nor in millionaire campaigns to support gigantic temples. God is in simplicity, in sincere delivery, in connection that does not require material exchanges or sacrifices. When the church becomes more of a company than a space for spiritual elevation, the chosen one feels that his or her soul no longer belongs to that place. True spiritual growth does not happen through status, power, or wealth. It happens in the internal search, in the transformation of the heart, in the practice of loving others. When religion moves away from these principles, it becomes just a system, an institution like any other, and this is why so many chosen ones make the difficult decision to walk away, because they know that their faith cannot be bought, manipulated, or used as a bargaining chip. Before making the decision to leave the church, many chosen ones go through a long period of spiritual discomfort. Something inside them tells them that something is wrong, that what should feed them spiritually is actually leaving them more and more empty. They try to ignore it, they try to fit in, they try to follow like the others, but the restlessness only increases. The spirit is not mistaken, and when something is not aligned with the truth, it screams, asking for change. This feeling can be confusing and even scary. Questioning the church is seen as an act of rebellion, and many are afraid of straying and losing their connection with God. But over time, they realize that this connection was never in the institution, but within them. The truth begins to reveal itself, and doubt turns into clarity. Discomfort is the first sign of awakening. It indicates that you can no longer ignore your intuition, that your soul asks for a purer and more authentic path. It's the beginning of a journey of liberation, where the chosen one finally understands that their spirituality does not depend on dogmas, but on their own direct connection with God. Many chosen ones reach a point where they realize that true faith cannot be limited by walls or by rules imposed by men. The connection with God goes far beyond a physical temple, as He is everywhere, in the silence of a dawn, in the breath of the wind, in the sincere look of someone who offers help without expecting anything in return. God was never restricted to one location, nor to a set of rigid traditions. True faith is a direct link between the soul and the Creator, without the need for intermediaries, without mandatory rituals, without dogmas that distort the essence of the divine. The chosen ones realize that the church, in its institutionalized form, often establishes barriers instead of building bridges. Rules are created about how to pray, when to pray, how much to offer, who can or cannot be blessed. But God is not bound by these limitations. He does not require money to hear a prayer, nor does he need a leader to intercede for those who truly seek him. Faith is an intimate, individual, and profound experience, which can only be felt in the heart. When a chosen one awakens to this reality, he understands that he does not need to be physically inside a church to be spiritually connected to the divine. The search for this direct connection becomes a priority. Many begin to delve deeper into prayer, meditation, and silent reflection. They discover that God speaks between the lines of life, in small coincidences, in answers that appear when least expected. And above all, they realize that the more they free themselves from the constraints imposed by formal religion, the more intensely they feel the divine presence. It is not about rejecting the church completely, but about understanding that God has always been beyond it. The chosen ones do not leave the church by chance. There are clear signs that something bigger is happening in their lives, a spiritual transformation that leads them to seek answers beyond the conventional. These signs can come in different forms: an inner restlessness that grows every day, recurring dreams that seem to carry hidden messages, a feeling that the reality around you no longer makes sense as it once did. It's as if a silent voice inside the heart calls to something that is not yet completely clear, but that, at the same time, cannot be ignored. Often, the first sign of this call is dissatisfaction with what previously seemed sufficient. The person begins to notice flaws in religious discourses. They feel that preaching no longer resonates with their soul, that empty promises do not bring the expected peace. Next comes the search for answers outside of what you have been taught. The chosen one begins to study more deeply, to question what they have always accepted without reflection. And it is at this moment that he discovers that his connection with God does not need to be mediated by anyone. That true spirituality is something much greater than any institution can offer. Another big sign is synchronicity. Events that seem like coincidences but carry profound messages. A book that appears at the right time, an unexpected conversation that provides the answer to an old question, a sequence of events that pushes a person far from their comfort zone. This is all part of awakening. When the chosen one notices these signs and accepts his journey, he understands that his departure from the church is not a mistake, but a direction. God is not taking you away from him, but rather from the distractions that kept you from seeing him clearly. Despite feeling this call to something greater, many chosen ones face intense internal conflict before leaving the church. This is because, from a young age, they were taught to believe that leaving a religious institution is the same as moving away from God. This fear is carefully cultivated by some doctrines that preach that only within the church there is salvation, that those who move away are lost, condemned. But this belief is based on control, not spiritual truth. Religious guilt becomes a difficult weight to bear. The chosen one wonders if he's making a mistake, if he is being rebellious, if he is disappointing God by questioning the rules that have been imposed on him. He's afraid of losing divine protection, of not finding a new path. But, over time, he realizes that this fear does not come from God, but from men. The Creator never imposed chains on faith, never forced anyone to follow him out of fear or obligation. True connection with God is born from love and freedom, not guilt and blind submission. Overcoming this internal conflict is one of the most difficult steps in spiritual awakening. But when the chosen one understands that God is within him and not in a building or in dogmas, the guilt disappears. He realizes that his journey is unique, that his spiritual growth requires courage to break with old beliefs and follow what really makes sense for his soul. Freedom from this fear is what allows the chosen one to finally embrace their faith authentically, without intermediaries, without fear, without guilt. Many chosen ones, when they move away from the church, seek answers directly in the Bible. And what they find is surprising. Jesus was never tied to temples or rigid traditions. He walked among people, taught the simplicity of faith, spoke of love, humility, and direct connection with God. He condemned the hypocrisy of the religious leaders of the time, who transformed spirituality into a game of power and control. And that is exactly what still happens today in many religious institutions. In Matthew 6:24, the Bible makes it clear, no one can serve two masters. Either he will hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. This passage reveals a truth that many ignore. When religion becomes a business, it moves away from God. When faith is used as a tool of manipulation, its essence is lost. The chosen ones feel this distortion and cannot accept it. The true spirituality taught by Jesus is free, without chains, without financial demands, without obligatory rituals. It's about loving your neighbor, seeking the truth within yourself, living with integrity and genuine faith. The Bible, when read with an open heart, reveals that God always wanted us to be free, not prisoners of an institution. Churches, in their essence, could be places of welcome, learning, and strengthening of faith. And in some cases, they still are. However, many have turned into spiritual prisons where freedom of thought is discouraged and faith has become a bargaining chip. Fear is used as a tool of control, the fear of hell, of sin, of damnation. But true spirituality cannot be built on fear. It is born from love, from sincere search, from pure connection with God. The problem is not in the existence of churches, but in the way many of them are led. Instead of strengthening the believer's connection with God, some end up creating dependence, making people believe that they cannot find Him on their own. This goes against everything Jesus taught. He did not found luxurious temples, did not create a system for collecting wealth, did not demand blind obedience. He simply showed that God is available to everyone, without barriers. The chosen ones, upon realizing this reality, understand that their faith needs to be greater than any institution. They do not reject God when they leave the church. On the contrary, they encounter Him in a purer and truer form. They discover that the greatest house of prayer is their own heart. Intuition has always been a compass for the chosen, a silent voice that whispers truths that are not always evident to others. From an early age, many feel a sense of restlessness, a heightened awareness that something is out of alignment around them. This instinct is not the result of chance. It is a spiritual gift that allows you to see beyond appearances, beyond imposed traditions, beyond empty words. Intuition is the channel through which the Creator communicates directly with His children, guiding them along paths that do not always make sense immediately, but which, over time, reveal their true purpose. However, society and especially religious institutions tend to discourage this gift. From a young age, we are taught to obey without question, to follow rules without understanding the reason behind them. Intuition, which should be an essential tool for discerning right from wrong, is often suppressed in the name of conformity. But the chosen ones cannot ignore this inner voice. They feel when something isn't right, when a message doesn't resonate with their soul, when an environment seems to drain them instead of strengthening them spiritually. And it is exactly this perception that leads them to seek something beyond the walls of the church, as they understand that the connection with God cannot be forced or manipulated, but rather lived authentically. The more the chosen one learns to trust their intuition, the clearer the path becomes. He realizes that the answers he seeks are not in memorized speeches or empty promises, but within himself, in the silence of the heart, in the feeling of peace that arises when something is truly aligned with the divine. Following your intuition is an act of courage, as it means trusting yourself even when the world says otherwise. But it is also an act of faith, for it means recognizing that God speaks in subtle ways, and that true spiritual awakening begins when one learns to listen, feel, and act on that inner voice. For centuries, religion has positioned itself as a bridge between man and God, as if the Creator were inaccessible without the intercession of leaders, temples, and rituals. But the truth is that this connection has always been within everyone's reach, without the need for mediators. The chosen ones, upon awakening to this reality, realize that their faith cannot be limited by human traditions, as God has never been tied to rules made by men. True spirituality does not require permission. It does not impose barriers. It does not charge fees. It simply exists within each person, waiting to be recognized and lived fully. Finding God without intermediaries means learning to feel His presence in the small details of life. It is in the silence of a peaceful morning, in the grandeur of the universe, in the beating of your own heart. You don't need to be in a luxurious temple to find Him, because He is in every breath, in every sincere thought, in every act of love. The chosen ones realize that true prayer does not need rehearsed words, but rather an open heart. Connection with the divine does not require rigid postures or set schedules. It happens the moment you allow yourself to feel, reflect, and be grateful. But this freedom is scary. Many spend years believing that they can only approach God through the instructions of a religious leader. Letting go of this idea can generate fear, doubt, and even guilt. However, the chosen ones who follow this path realize that they have never been so close to the Creator. Without intermediaries, the relationship becomes purer, deeper, more true. They discover that they don't need permissions to be spiritual, because the only validation that really matters comes from God Himself. The spiritual journey of the chosen is not just internal, it also reflects on the outside world, and not always in a positive way. When someone decides to step away from the church to pursue their connection with God independently, they will inevitably face judgment. Friends and family may interpret this decision as rebellion, weakness, or even a betrayal of faith. The fear of what others will think can be a major obstacle, as we are conditioned to seek acceptance, to follow established standards, to avoid conflicts. However, spiritual awakening requires courage to face misunderstanding and remain steadfast on the path that resonates with one's soul. Often, those who criticize or condemn a chosen one for their decision are just projecting their own fears. They cling to religious structures because they feel safe within them, and seeing someone question these structures threatens their own worldview. Instead of trying to convince others, the chosen one learns that the best way to respond to judgment is through example. Over time, your inner peace, your clarity, and your connection with the divine will speak louder than any argument. Being judged and rejected can be painful, but it is also a test of strength. The great spiritual teachers of history have been criticized for challenging what was considered right. Jesus was rejected by religious leaders of his time precisely because he preached a free faith, based on love and not control. The chosen ones follow this same path. Although they face resistance, they know that their mission is greater than the opinions of others. Leaving the church is not the end of faith, but the beginning of a new chapter. Those chosen who free themselves from institutional constraints find themselves faced with a challenge and at the same time a unique opportunity, building their own spiritual journey. No limiting dogmas, no need for external approval, no fear of making mistakes. The path becomes a sincere search for meaning, a personal discovery of what truly strengthens the soul. And each step is guided by intuition, experience, and direct relationship with God. This journey can be lonely at first, as not everyone will understand this process. But over time, the chosen one realizes that he was never truly alone. He begins to attract people with the same vision, discovers new ways to connect with the sacred, creates his own prayer and meditation rituals. He realizes that faith is not something fixed, but something alive, which evolves along with his spiritual growth. There is no single right way. Each chosen one will find their own way of approaching the divine. The important thing is to keep your heart open, keep searching, keep learning. True spirituality is not something imposed, but something felt. It is this freedom that allows faith to become something genuine, transformative, and eternal. Getting here doesn't mean the path is over. The spiritual journey of a chosen one never ends, as there is always something new to learn, to feel, to experience. But the big difference now is that he knows he doesn't need a temple or strict rules to be close to God. He understood that his spirituality is a state of being, a constant presence in his life. And most of all, you know that you have never been and will never be alone. Even in moments of doubt, of loneliness, of questioning, there is something greater guiding your steps. God never abandons those who seek the truth. The journey may have challenges, it may require strength and patience, but each obstacle overcome strengthens faith. And this faith, built on freedom and personal experience, is the most unshakable there is. The world may not understand, religion may criticize, but the chosen one knows. Their connection with the divine is real, living and eternal. He was called to something greater, and this journey still has a lot to reveal.